Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are fine and doing well. Let's start the Minecraft gameplay with Reddit story in background. I'm sitting here in my car, parked about 3 blocks away from my childhood home, just staring at the steering wheel and wondering how the hell we got to this point. I told them this would happen. I didn't just suggest it, I didn't just hint at it. I literally sat my parents down at their kitchen table 2 years ago and begged them not to sign those papers. I told them that mixing family and finances is like pouring gasoline on a flickering candle, especially when that family member is my sister, Sarah. But my mom just patted my hand, gave me that look, the one that says I'm being difficult again, and told me that Sarah had changed. Well, Sarah hadn't changed. If anything, she'd just gotten better at the game, and now my parents are staring down the barrel of a financial disaster that might actually end up putting them on the street in their 70s. To understand why this is such a train wreck, you have to understand the dynamic between me and my sister. I'm the stable one. I went to college, got a degree in accounting, and I've been working a steady corporate job in Chicago for the last decade. I'm the daughter who remembers birthdays, pays her taxes on time, and never asks for a dime. Sarah, on the other hand, has always been the free spirit. In our family, free spirit is just a polite way of saying she's a 38-year-old woman who has never held a job for more than 6 months and views other people's bank accounts as a personal challenge. She's charming, I'll give her that. She can walk into a room and make everyone feel like they're the most important person in the world, which is exactly how she's managed to grift her way through life without ever facing a single consequence. About 3 years ago, my dad's health started taking a bit of a dip. Nothing life-threatening, but enough that the big 4-bedroom house they'd lived in for 30 years was becoming a burden. The yard was too much, the stairs were getting harder for him to climb, and the property taxes in our part of the suburbs were skyrocketing. They wanted to downsize, but they didn't want to go into a senior living community. They wanted to stay independent. That's when Sarah saw her opening. At the time, she was living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with her 2 kids, Leo and Mia, and her latest boyfriend, a guy named Rick who claimed to be a consultant, but mostly just sat on the couch playing video games and talking about crypto. Sarah came to them with this grand proposal. She told them that instead of them buying a small condo and her continuing to struggle with rent, they should pool their resources. The idea was to sell the family home, use the massive equity they'd built up over 30 years, and buy a massive, multi-generational property. It would be a family compound, as she called it. They'd buy a house with a finished walkout basement or a separate guest wing where my parents could live. Sarah and the kids would live in the main part of the house. She argued that this way, she could be right there to take care of Dad as he got older, the kids would grow up with their grandparents, and everyone's cost of living would go down. When my mom called me to tell me the plan, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I remember exactly where I was, standing in the grocery store aisle, holding a carton of eggs. I told her right then and there, "Mom, do not do this. You are essentially giving Sarah control over your primary asset. You know how she is with money. You know she can't keep a budget." My mom got defensive immediately. She told me I was being cynical and that Sarah was a mother now, that she was grounded and focused on the future. She even said that I was just jealous because Sarah was the one stepping up to take care of them while I lived 2 hours away in the city. That hurt, honestly, because I'm the one who handles their taxes and helped them set up their retirement accounts. But I bit my tongue and tried to focus on the logistics. I asked about the legal side of things. I asked whose name would be on the deed. My mom said they were thinking of putting both their names and Sarah's name on it to make things easier for the future. I nearly dropped the eggs. I explained to her, as clearly as I could, that if Sarah's name was on that deed, she would have equal ownership of the property regardless of who put down the money. If Sarah got sued, if she filed for bankruptcy, if she had a falling out with them, the house would be at risk. I begged them to at least see a real estate attorney and set up a proper trust. They promised they would, but of course, Sarah convinced them it was an unnecessary expense and that lawyers just complicate things between family. Against every warning I gave, they went through with it. They sold the family home for $600,000. After paying off the small remaining mortgage and fees, they had about $500,000 in cash. They used $400,000 of that as a massive down payment on a beautiful $700,000 house in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. The remaining $300,000 was a mortgage. But here was the catch. Because my parents were retired and didn't have a high enough active income for a new 30-year loan of that size, Sarah had to be the primary borrower on the mortgage. My parents were co-signers, but for all intents and purposes, the bank saw Sarah as the one responsible for the monthly payments. The agreement, which was just a verbal promise made over a Sunday dinner, was that my parents would pay for the down payment and all the initial renovations to the basement suite. In exchange, Sarah would pay the monthly mortgage, taxes, and insurance. It seemed, on paper, like a win for everyone. My parents got a brand new, accessible living space with no monthly rent or mortgage payment, and Sarah got to live in a luxury home for a fraction of what it would cost to rent a decent apartment. But I knew my sister. I knew that responsibility was a foreign concept to her. For the first 6 months, everything seemed fine. My mom would call me and gush about how wonderful it was to see the grandkids every morning. She'd send photos of them baking cookies together. Sarah was apparently being a saint, helping my dad with his physical therapy and keeping the house spotless. I started to wonder if I really was the cynical, bitter sister I thought I was. Maybe people really do change. Maybe the stability of a beautiful home was exactly what Sarah needed to finally get her life together. But then, the little cracks started to show. It started with a phone call from my mom about 18 months ago. She sounded a bit stressed, which was rare for her. She mentioned offhand that Sarah had asked for a short-term loan to cover some unexpected car repairs. I asked how much, and Mom hesitated before saying it was $3,000. $3,000 for a car repair? That sounded like a whole new engine. I asked if Rick was working yet, and Mom sighed, saying he was between projects, but was helping out a lot around the house. I reminded Mom that Sarah was supposed to be the one paying the mortgage, and that if she couldn't afford a car repair, how was she handling a $3,000 monthly house payment? Mom brushed it off, saying it was just a one-time thing. A few months later, it wasn't a car repair. It was the property tax bill that had come in higher than expected. Then it was a medical bill for one of the kids. Every time I talked to my parents, there was a new reason why they were cutting Sarah a check. I tried to stay out of it, I really did. I didn't want to be the "I told you so" daughter, but it was getting harder and harder to watch. I noticed that my parents stopped going out to dinner. They stopped talking about the cruise they wanted to take for their 50th anniversary. They looked tired. Not just old tired, but burdened tired. The real bomb dropped 3 weeks ago. I was at my desk at work when my dad called me. My dad is a man of very few words, a stoic Midwestern guy who doesn't like to complain. But his voice was shaking. He told me that a man had come to the door that morning and served them with a notice. It wasn't just a late payment notice. It was a formal notice of default. Sarah hadn't paid the mortgage in 4 months. For months, I felt the blood drain from my face. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "where is Sarah?" "What did she say?" He told me she'd been telling them every month that she was handling it. She'd even shown them receipts that she'd printed out from her computer, receipts that I now realize were completely faked. She'd been taking the utility money my parents gave her every month and using it for God knows what, while the actual mortgage was being ignored. And the worst part? Rick was gone. Apparently, he'd cleared out his stuff and vanished 2 weeks prior, and Sarah had been hiding that from them too, pretending he was just away on a business trip. I drove down there that night. The atmosphere in that beautiful $700,000 house was suffocating. My mom was in tears in the kitchen, and my dad was sitting in his recliner in the basement, looking like he'd aged 10 years in a week. Sarah was nowhere to be found. She'd gone for a drive to clear her head. When she finally came back at midnight, smelling like expensive perfume and white wine, I didn't give her a chance to speak. I followed her into the kitchen and demanded to see the bank statements. She tried the old Sarah charm. She tried to hug me and tell me it was all a big misunderstanding with the bank's online portal. But I'm an accountant. I don't do misunderstandings. I pushed her until she finally broke down and admitted that she hadn't had a job in 6 months. She'd lost her position at the dental office back in the fall and had been living off credit cards and the money she'd been siphoning from our parents. The mortgage wasn't just 4 months behind. There were late fees, legal fees, and unpaid property taxes totaling over $20,000. But that wasn't even the kicker. As I sat there at midnight, scrolling through the digital records she finally gave me access to, I found the thing that made my stomach drop. Sarah hadn't just defaulted on the mortgage. About a year ago, she'd taken out a secondary home equity line of credit, a HELOC, for another $50,000. And because her name was on the deed, and because she'd managed to forge my parents' signatures or convince them to sign some routine paperwork they didn't understand, she had blown through every cent of that too. The equity my parents had spent 30 years building, the money that was supposed to be their safety net, their legacy, and their care fund, was effectively gone. They were sitting in a house they didn't own, anchored to a debt they couldn't pay, with a daughter who had essentially robbed them blind while smiling and serving them tea. I looked at my sister, who was sobbing into a dish towel, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a betrayal of the highest order. I spent the rest of that night trying to figure out a way forward, but the numbers didn't lie. Between the primary mortgage and the HELOC, they owed nearly $400,000 on a house that was now worth maybe $750,000. If they sold it immediately, they might walk away with a little bit of cash, but certainly not enough to buy anything else. And because of the default, my parents' credit, which had been perfect for 50 years, was now being dragged into the gutter alongside Sarah's. I looked at my parents, who were hovering in the doorway of the kitchen, looking at me like I was the only person who could save them. And the most heartbreaking part was that I wasn't sure if I could. I had warned them. I had shouted it from the rooftops. But they had chosen to believe the lie because the lie was prettier than the truth. Now, the truth was standing in their kitchen with a wine-stained blouse, and the house was about to be taken away. This was just the beginning of the nightmare. The morning after the confrontation was a blur of caffeine and cold reality. I didn't sleep a wink. I spent the entire night at the dining room table with my laptop, 3 different colored highlighters, and a stack of bank statements that told a story of absolute recklessness. Sarah had stayed in her room, presumably crying or packing or doing whatever people like her do when their world finally implodes. My parents were up at dawn, sitting in the living room in total silence, staring out the window at the neighborhood they were about to be evicted from. I called a friend of mine, a real estate attorney named Marcus, at 8 in the morning. I explained the situation as concisely as I could. I told him about the deed, the mortgage, and the secret HELOC. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Jen," Marcus said, his voice heavy, "if your parents' signatures are on those HELOC documents, proving forgery is going to be an uphill battle. If they sign them without reading them, it's even worse. The bank doesn't care about family drama. They care about the collateral. And right now, that house is their collateral." He told me the first step was to get a stopgap payment to the bank to halt the immediate foreclosure proceedings, but that would only buy us 30 days. $20,000 just to get the bank to stop calling. I looked at my parents' savings account, the one I had access to. They had maybe $15,000 left. That was it. Their entire life savings, outside of their modest Social Security checks, had been bled dry by Sarah's emergencies. I walked into the living room and sat across from them. "We need $20,000 by Friday," I said, not sugarcoating it. "And that doesn't fix the problem. It just buys us time to sell the house." My mom looked like she'd been struck. "Sell the house? But Jen, where would we go? We put everything into this place. We don't have the old house anymore." "I know, Mom," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "But Sarah has spent the money. It's gone. The HELOC she took out, that $50,000. Do you remember signing anything last summer? A notary coming by?" My dad rubbed his face with his hands. She said it was just a refinance to get a lower interest rate. She said it would save us $500 a month. We signed what she told us to sign. We trusted her, Jen. She's our daughter. That was the recurring theme. She's our daughter. It was the shield Sarah used to deflect every bit of accountability. I went upstairs and banged on Sarah's door. I didn't wait for her to answer. I just walked in. The room was a mess. Expensive clothes thrown everywhere, shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford to shop at. "Where did the money go, Sarah?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. $50,000 in a year, plus the mortgage payments you weren't making. That's nearly $80,000. Where is it? Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes red and puffy. "I had debts, Jen. You don't know what it's like. Rick, he had these ideas, these investments. He said we'd double the money in months. And then the kids needed things. Private tutoring, that summer camp in the mountains. I just wanted them to have a good life." "A good life?" I snapped. "You're about to make your parents homeless so your kids could go to a mountain camp? Are you insane?" "I was going to pay it back," she wailed. "I have a lead on a new job, a high-paying one in medical sales. I just needed a few more months. It was the same song she'd been singing since she was 16. A lead, a project, a turnaround. I realized then that there was no point in arguing with her. Sarah lived in a different reality, one where consequences were things that happened to other people. I walked out and went back downstairs. I spent the next 3 days on the phone. I called the bank, I called the tax assessor, I even called a local real estate agent to get a broker's price opinion on the house. The news wasn't great. The market had cooled slightly, and while the house was beautiful, it had some Sarah-sized issues. She'd started a bathroom renovation in the kids' wing and never finished it, leaving exposed pipes and subflooring. That alone was going to knock $20,000 off the asking price. By Wednesday, I had a plan, but it was a brutal one. I told my parents they had to move out. Not in a month, not in a year, but now. I told them I would rent a small 2-bedroom apartment near my place in the city. I would pay the security deposit and the first few months of rent. We would put the house on the market as is and hope for a quick cash buyer. Whatever equity was left after paying off the 2 loans and the back taxes would be theirs to live on, but Sarah wouldn't see a single penny of it. "And what about Sarah and the kids?" my mom asked, her voice trembling. "Sarah is an adult," I said. "She can find a job and a place she can afford. The kids can stay with me for a few weeks if they have to. But Sarah is not coming to my house." My mom started to protest, but my dad stood up. He looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of genuine anger in his eyes. "Martha, Jen is right. Sarah lied to us. She stole from us. She sat at our table and watched us get served with those papers and didn't say a word. She can't stay with us anymore." For a few days, it felt like we were finally making progress. I had the real estate agent coming over on Friday to take photos. I had a moving truck scheduled for my parents' things. But Sarah wasn't going to go quietly. She knew that if the house was sold, her free ride was over. On Thursday night, I was staying in the guest room, the one that wasn't renovated, when I heard a commotion in the kitchen. I ran down to find Sarah and my mom in a heated argument. Sarah was holding a stack of papers, my notes, my spreadsheets, my plan. "You're trying to kick me out," Sarah screamed at me the moment I walked in. "You're trying to make me and my children homeless. You've always hated me, Jen. You've always been the perfect one, and you just can't wait to see me fail." "You've already failed, Sarah," I said, staying remarkably calm. "You failed the moment you forged Dad's signature on a $50,000 loan." "I didn't forge it," she shrieked. "He signed it. He knew what he was doing." "He didn't know what he was doing because you lied to him about what it was," I shouted back. Then she did something truly low. She turned to my mom, who was sobbing by the sink. "Mom, if Jen does this, you'll never see the grandkids again. I'll move to Florida. I'll go to Rick's family. You'll never see Leo and Mia grow up. Is that what you want? To satisfy Jen's ego and lose your grandchildren?" It was pure, unadulterated emotional blackmail, and I could see it working. My mom's face went pale. She looked at me, then at Sarah, then back at me. The leverage Sarah had wasn't financial, it was the kids. She was using her own children as human shields to protect her lifestyle. "Sarah, don't you dare do that," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Don't you dare use those kids. I'll do whatever I have to do to protect my family." Sarah yelled, "This house is my home too. My name is on the deed. You can't sell it without my signature, Jen. Did you forget that? I'm an owner, and I'm not signing a damn thing." She was right. That was the one thing Marcus had warned me about. Since her name was on the deed, she had to agree to the sale. I had been operating on the assumption that she'd be so guilty or so scared of legal action that she'd just comply. But I had underestimated her desperation. She was willing to let the bank foreclose on all of them, ruining my parents' lives completely, just to spite me and stay in that house for a few more months of free living. The next 48 hours were a psychological war zone. Sarah stopped talking to me entirely. She'd walk into a room, grab a snack, and walk out like I wasn't there. But she was whispering in my mom's ear constantly. I'd catch them in the corner of the living room, Sarah crying and showing mom photos of the kids when they were babies. She was systematically breaking my mother down, playing on her guilt and her love. By Saturday, the real estate agent arrived. Sarah refused to let him in. She literally stood in the doorway and told him that she was a co-owner and she did not consent to the property being shown. The agent, a nice guy named Bob, looked at me with pure pity. "I'm sorry, Jen," he whispered as we stood on the driveway. If there's a title dispute or an owner who won't cooperate, I can't list the property. You'd have to go to court for a partition sale, and that could take a year or more. By then, the bank will have already taken the house. I felt like I was drowning. Every exit was being blocked by Sarah's malice. I went back inside and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table, a single lamp on in the dim afternoon light. He looked at me, and I saw a tear roll down his cheek. "She won't sign, will she?" he asked. "No, Dad. She won't. So we lose it all? Everything we worked for? It's just gone." I didn't have an answer for him. I had spent my whole life being the one with the answers, the one who could fix the balance sheet, the one who could make the numbers work. But you can't fix a person who doesn't want to be fixed. You can't budget for a sister who is willing to burn the whole house down just to keep the embers warm for herself. That night, I sat in the dark guest room, listening to the sounds of the house. I heard Sarah laughing in her room, actually laughing, while watching a movie. I heard my mom's muffled sobs from the basement suite, and I realized that playing by the rules wasn't working. I had been trying to handle this like an accountant, with logic and spreadsheets and legalities. But this wasn't a business problem. This was a war. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the digital files Sarah had given me access to that first night. She thought she'd been clever, deleting the most incriminating stuff, but she wasn't a tech person. She didn't know about recently deleted folders or cloud backups that were still linked to the tablet she'd let the kids use. I spent the next 4 hours digging, and that's when I found it. It wasn't just a forged signature on a helic. It was something much, much worse. Sarah hadn't just been stealing from my parents. She'd been involved in something else, something that involved Rick and a business that looked suspiciously like a high-level wire fraud scheme. There were emails, photos of checks that shouldn't exist, and a series of messages to Rick that made my skin crawl. I realized then that Sarah wasn't just staying in the house because she wanted a nice place to live. She was staying because she was hiding, and the house was her fortress. But every fortress has a weak point, and I had just found hers. I didn't want to do what I was about to do. It would tear our family apart forever. There would be no coming back from this. But it was the only way to save my parents from the wreckage Sarah had created. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and waited for morning. The sun came up on Sunday morning with a cold, gray light that matched exactly how I felt inside. There was no more room for sisterly love or family loyalty. Those things had been buried under $80,000 of debt and a mountain of lies. I took my laptop and went down to the kitchen. I didn't make coffee. I just sat there, waiting. Sarah came down about 30 minutes later, looking smug. She was wearing a new silk robe, likely bought with my parents' money, and she actually had the audacity to hum a little tune as she reached for the coffee pot. "I thought you'd be gone by now, Jen," she said, not looking at me. "Since you can't sell the house, there's not much for you to do here, is there?" "Sit down, Sarah," I said. My voice was different. It wasn't angry or loud. It was flat, empty. She turned around, a smirk on her face. "Excuse me? I don't think I said sit down." I turned the laptop screen toward her. I had a folder open. The first file was a PDF of a wire transfer. It was for $12,000, sent from a business account that didn't belong to her, into a personal account that my parents didn't know she had. The second file was a series of messages between her and Rick. In them, she was coaching him on how to verify my dad's identity over the phone for the bank. She had literally scripted the fraud. The smirk on Sarah's face didn't just fade, it evaporated. Her skin went a sickly shade of gray. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said. "What matters is that this is felony wire fraud. This is elder abuse. This is identity theft. And this," I pointed to a specific email from Rick, "looks like a very interesting conversation about cleaning funds from a real estate scam in the city." You wouldn't," she stammered. "You wouldn't call the police. The kids. Jen, think about the kids. If I go to jail, they lose their mother. They lost their mother a long time ago, Sarah. They just haven't realized it yet. Right now, they have a predator living in the same house as them." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "Here is how this is going to go. You are going to sign the listing agreement for this house. You are going to sign a power of attorney giving me the right to handle the sale and the distribution of funds. And then, you are going to pack your bags and you are going to leave. Today, I have nowhere to go," she cried, the tears starting again. But this time they were real. They were tears of terror. "You can go to Rick. You can go to a shelter. You can go to hell for all I care, I said. But if you are still in this house by sunset, I am driving to the police station. I have already copied these files to a cloud drive and sent the link to Marcus. If anything happens to me, or if I don't check in with him by 5 p.m., he sends everything to the district attorney. It was a bluff, mostly. Marcus knew about the financial mess, but I hadn't sent him the fraud evidence yet. I wanted to give her one last chance to do the right thing, even if she was forced into it. Sarah stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, she slumped in her chair. The free spirit was gone. She looked small, defeated, and ugly. I need money to get a place, she muttered. There is no money, Sarah. You spent it all. You can take your car, the one Dad paid the $3,000 repair on, and whatever you can fit in it. The kids stay here with me and the parents until we figure out a long-term plan for them. You are not taking them into whatever hole you're about to crawl into. That was the hardest part, taking the kids. But I knew that as long as she had them, she had a leash on my parents. I had to cut every tie. To my surprise, she didn't fight me on the kids. I think, deep down, a part of her was relieved. She'd never actually wanted to be a mother. She wanted the status of being a mother, the sympathy it bought her. She signed the papers I prepared. Her hand was shaking so hard the signature was barely legible, but it was there. The next 6 hours were some of the most surreal of my life. I watched my sister pack her life into a mid-sized SUV. My parents stood on the lawn, watching their daughter leave. My mom was a wreck, leaning against my dad, who just stood there like a statue. There were no big goodbyes, no dramatic speeches, just the sound of a trunk slamming and a car backing out of a driveway. When she was gone, a weird sort of peace settled over the house. It wasn't a happy peace. It was the peace you feel after a storm has finally finished destroying everything and the wind stops blowing. The next few months were a grueling marathon. I listed the house, and because I was now in control of the process, I was able to get a fixer-upper crew in to finish the bathroom and stage the place. We sold it in 45 days. It wasn't the $750,000 I'd hoped for, but we got $710,000. After the primary mortgage was paid, the HELOC was cleared, the back taxes were settled, and the real estate commissions were deducted, there was exactly $84,000 left. $84,000. That was all that remained of my parents' 30 years of hard work. From a $600,000 home to $84,000 in a savings account. It was a tragedy by any definition. I moved my parents into a nice, one-bedroom senior apartment about 10 minutes from my house in Chicago. It's small, but it's clean, safe, and most importantly, it's in their name only. I handle every single one of their bills. They have a small allowance for groceries and fun, but the bulk of their remaining money is locked in a trust that requires my signature for any withdrawal over $500. The kids, Leo and Mia, are living with me for now. We're working through the legal guardianship process. It's been hard. They miss their mom, even though they know she did something bad. They're in therapy, and slowly, the nightmares are stopping. They're doing better in school. They have a routine. They have stability. As for Sarah, she vanished for a while. We heard through a cousin that she was in Vegas for a few months, then back in Florida. Every now and then, my mom gets a restricted call on her cell phone. She doesn't answer it anymore. She looks at the screen, sees the number, and hands the phone to me or my dad. We haven't heard from Rick, and honestly, I hope I never do. A few nights ago, I was over at my parents' new apartment. We were eating takeout Chinese food at their small dinette set. My dad looked around the room, then at me. "You know, Jen," he said, his voice quiet. "I used to think being right was the most important thing. I was so angry that you were right about Sarah. I hated you for it for a long time." "I know, Dad," I said. "But I was wrong," he continued. "Being right didn't matter. Being protected mattered. You tried to protect us, and we wouldn't let you. I'm sorry for that." My mom reached over and took my hand. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes was enough. She still mourns Sarah. I think she always will, but she knows the truth now. The free spirit was just a ghost, and the daughter she thought she knew never really existed. I'm still an accountant. I still look at the world in terms of assets and liabilities. But I've learned that the most dangerous liabilities aren't the ones on a balance sheet. They're the ones that sit at your dinner table, call you mom or dad, and tell you exactly what you want to hear while they're reaching for your wallet. I saved what I could, but the cost was astronomical. We have a home now, and we have the kids, and we have each other. But every time I drive past a house that looks like that big family compound we almost had, I feel a shiver. I told them it would happen. And the hardest part of being right is having to live in the world that proves it. I think about that final night sometimes. The look on Sarah's face when she realized she'd lost. Part of me wants to feel bad for her. Part of me wants to believe that somewhere deep down, she cares about the wreckage she left behind. But then I look at my dad's hands, shaking as he reaches for his tea, and I look at the kids drawing on my fridge, and I realize that some people don't leave wreckage by accident. They leave it because it's the only thing they know how to build. And me? I'm just the one left to pick up the pieces. It's not the life I planned, and it's certainly not the one my parents dreamed of, but it's real. And in this family, after everything we've been through, real is the only thing we have left to hold on to.